Black water, strobing whitecaps, and sleet ticking off titanium. The A-10's canopy was a vibrating lens of rain. The Baltic below, a bruised sheet broken by 3 hard wakes knifing toward a single pool of light. An American boarding team hanging off the side of a cargo vessel. In her right hand, Captain Liana Tran felt the throttle's knurl bite her glove. In her left, the stick shook as she forced the hog lower, beneath a ceiling that kept sagging like wet canvas. Her HUD was a green ghost in the weather. On her right, MFD, the boats bloomed. Fast, clustered, no AIS. On the radio, higher command was a flat voice. Raven 2-1, weather below minimums. RTB, say again, RTB. Her thumb hovered over the master arm guard, not flipping it yet. ROE required positive ID, no fire into the superstructure, safeguard friendlies. But the seal ladder was still down. A dark figure slipped, swung, clung. One bad wake and he'd be in the water. If she climbed now, those boats would reach the ladder in under a minute. If she stayed, she'd be ignoring a direct order in marginal icing with limited fuel. She swallowed, jaw tight. The altimeter unwound. The boats fanned to split her field of fire. Raven 2-1, acknowledge RTB. Liana clicked her mic once. Nonverbal, not compliance. She dropped the hog another 50 feet. Hard cut to black. 14 hours earlier, Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany. Spangdahlem's briefing room always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and dry printer paper. Fluorescence hummed overhead, washing the mission slide in a flat white that made the Baltic on the map look less like water and more like a cold bruise. Captain Liana Tran sat forward, forearms on the table, helmet bag at her feet, eyes on the ship icon labeled Vesper. Lieutenant Colin Reeves stood beside the screen, sleeves rolled, laser pointer dot steady. Navy element boards at 1930Z, he said. Your on station is 1910Z, 30-minute lead, 1-hour cover. You are not the main effort. You are the insurance. Insurance. Liana kept her face neutral. Rules, Reeves tapped to the next slide. ROE. No fire without positive ID of hostile intent. No munitions into superstructure. You stay outside the ship's silhouette and... He pointed at the weather block. If the Baltic low pushes the ceiling under our minima, or you get ice accumulation, you RTB. Non-negotiable. There it was, the clause. The one ops had started adding ever since her winter CS sortie over Bavaria. The one she had aborted for icing before check-in. She'd been right then. Still, it had stuck. Sir, she said carefully. Intel says the ship's flagged, but it's within reach of coastal auxiliaries. If they tip their friends ashore, we could see small craft in under 10 minutes. I need to be able to... To what? Reeves cut in, not unkind, but firm. To loiter in unsafe conditions and give the mishap board a field day. She met his eyes. Reeves wasn't a villain. He was a commander in a theater where every gunshot could end up on a foreign feed. To stay long enough to actually cover them, she said. If I turn the second the ceiling dips, I'm leaving them on the ladder. The naval liaison, a lieutenant with a tired face, spoke up from the back. We don't expect heavy resistance, ma'am. This is more of a compliance check. Non-compliant people launch boats, Liana said, still looking at Reeves. Silence held a moment. Outside, through the small window, the sky over Germany was already the color of wet steel. Reeves exhaled. You'll have latitude to report deteriorating conditions. You will not have latitude to ignore an RTB. We clear? It wasn't what she wanted, but pushing harder here would only sharpen his suspicion. She nodded. Clear. Good. You're Raven 2-1. 2-2 stays on ground alert. Tanker is not guaranteed, so manage your fuel like an adult. Questions? She had one, but it would just confirm his read on her. She let it go. No, sir. Brief broke. Chairs scraped. The liaison gathered his folders and left. Phone already at his ear. Reeves lingered, pretending to shut down the projector. Liana zipped her helmet bag. Tran, he said, softer now. She paused. Sir? I know you're trying to get that winter aboard off your back. This isn't the op to do it. The water's crowded, the Russians are watching, and hire is jumpy. Stay inside the lines, you get credit. You drift outside, I can't protect you. The part of her that kept replaying a different night. Dust, mountains, a J-tack waiting too long for metal overhead. Wanted to say, they don't need paperwork, they need time on station. Instead, she said, understood. He studied her. You're good, Tran. Don't make me write that you weren't. She gave him a tight half smile, took the out, and walked. Pre-flight was muscle memory. Suit up, check survival gear, sign the forms that said she'd been told the weather would be bad. On the ramp, the cold wind off the Eiffel slapped her cheeks pink. The A-10C waited under a gray sky, squat and patient, pylons loaded light. Gun, 2 Mavericks, pods. A crew chief handed her the forms. Wind's picking up, ma'am. I can see that, she said, but her tone was warm. The hog was ugly to some, but to her it was steady, honest. It didn't mind being low and slow with teeth out. Inside the cockpit, she ran through checks, fingers precise. Radios, SADL, stores. She keyed up ground and got clearance. As she taxied, sleet began needling the canopy. She thought of Reeves's warning. She thought of a boarding ladder clanging against a hull in black water. If I turn early, they're alone. Tower cleared her for takeoff. She pushed the throttles. The hog rolled, engines spooled, the runway lights streaked past. At rotation, she eased back, and the A-10 lifted into a sky already starting to close. Headed north, toward a sea that rarely forgave hesitation. The Baltic weather wall didn't appear all at once. It built itself ahead of her like a dark scaffolding, layer after layer of moisture piling on the scope. At 12,000 feet, she still had room to work, but the tops were ragged and the returns on her radar were getting noisy. Below, the sea was a black slate with no horizon, just an absence of light. Spangdahlem Ops, Raven 2-1, passing 12 for 13, en route to station, she called, voice level. Raven 2-1 Ops, weather ahead is deteriorating faster than product. Recommend you maintain altitude until on top. Reeves's voice wasn't on the net, but she could hear his caution in the controller's tone. Copy deteriorating. I need to maintain visual on Vesper and inbound RHIB once they launch, Liana said. Hire is going to cost me that. A beat. We show you good on link. I want my own eyes, she said, but she didn't push it further. She let the hog eat miles. She brought up the situational display. The freighter's last reported position, fed through the Navy link, floated as a calm little symbol in otherwise empty water. Too calm. Ships didn't sit out there alone without somebody watching them from shore. The SEAL RHIB icon wasn't up yet. They were still aboard their mother craft, timing the darkness. The first shiver of turbulence hit her canopy, then another. Moisture smeared across, then froze in a faint lace at the edges. She checked her temps. Freezing level was climbing. If I stay up here, I'll arrive clean but blind. If I go down, I'll arrive useful but cold. She eased the nose down, not a dive, just a deliberate descent toward 9,000, then ATA 500. The hog shuddered as it slid into thicker air. Ice warnings flickered but stayed within limits. She kicked on the de-ice. Raven 2-1, Ops! Confirm you're descending? The voice came back, tighter. Affirm. Going to work closer to the deck for better surface picture. Within limits, Liana said. She didn't add for now. Be advised, RTB clause is tied to actual icing, not just forecast. Wilco. At 8,500 feet, the sea resolved a little. Not enough to paint every hull, but enough for her to see the way the whitecaps angled. Wind was pushing from the west. Nasty cross to the freighter's approach. That would make the seal ladder more miserable. She brought up saddle again, requesting updates from the maritime element. The answer that came back was faint, crackling. VHF from the Navy side wasn't loving the weather. Raven, Mayrops, boarding platform on timeline. Keep watch for small craft, over. Raven copies. I am in weather, comms intermittent. If you see launches before I do, push on link. Wilco. She settled into the rhythm of scanning. Forward-looking sensor, naked. Instrument, cross-check. The A-10 wasn't a dedicated maritime ISR platform, and nights like this reminded her. Sea clutter 8 contrast. Anything low, fast, and wet would only pop at the last minute. At 8,000, she got the first hint of what she'd hoped not to see. Movement near the coast. A faint, fast contact that didn't match commercial traffic patterns. Too small for AIS, wrong speed for a trawler. Marops Raven, I have possible coastal movement south-southeast of Vesper, say 5 to 7 miles from shore, heading general north. No answer, just static. She tightened her grip on the stick, kept descending to 7,500 to punch through another layer. The ice on her canopy began to clear where the warmer airflow worked it. Her world became a tunnel. Green HUD in front, dark water below, gray soup around. Ops came back instead of the Navy. Raven, Ops, you were told to maintain safe altitude. I can't see boats from safe altitude in this weather, Liana said, not bothering to smooth the edge in her voice. Seals go in blind if I stay high. I am still within aircraft limits. A pause as if whoever was talking was turning to look at Reeves. Raven, Ops, continue but monitor ice and report. Continuing. That was as close to permission as she was going to get. Dropping to 7,000 gave her the picture she needed. The freighter was a darker rectangle on dark water. Beyond it, closer to the coast, were 2 small shapes moving faster than the rest of the civilian traffic. They weren't yet on an intercept course, but they were in a position to be, if someone ashore told them where to go. So the ship isn't as low profile as they sold us. She marked the fast movers and built a mental timeline. If the SEALs launched on schedule, those boats could pivot and reach the freighter right when the boarding was at its most exposed. On the latter, hands occupied. She keyed the net again, lower, to cut through the static. Mayrops, this is Raven 2-1, possible early movers from shore. Your boarding may be compromised sooner than planned. This time Hale's voice came through, clipped, cool. Raven, Hale. Copy your sighting. We'll accelerate. Stay with us. I'm here, Liana said, eyes on the 2 small blips that should not have been there. I'm staying. Outside, the weather kept sinking. Inside, she'd just bought herself scrutiny. But she also had what she wanted, a real picture in time. The freighter shouldn't have lit up like that. At first, it was just a change in its wash, a subtle thickening of white water off the stern that told Liana the screws were biting harder. Then the deck lights shifted, snapped on in a staggered pattern that made the ship stand out on the Black Sea like a clumsy stage. Ships on routine tracks didn't do that at night unless they wanted someone to see, or someone had told them to make it easier to work on deck. Vesper, why are you awake? She murmured, more to herself than to the radio. She dipped the hog's nose again, angling for a better look without crowding the superstructure. The A-10's sensors pulled in the glow, the dark figures moving along the port rail. Not panic, purpose. Somebody was looking outward. On her display, the SEAL's small icon finally moved, RTB away, pushing through chop toward the freighter's lee side. Good. They were accelerating, like Hale had said. She flipped to the ops frequency. Ops, Raven 2-1. Target vessel is altering lighting and appears to be increasing speed. Possible elevated awareness. Ops came back after a lag that said they were conferring. Raven Ops, do you have confirmation of hostile act? There it was, the line. She could practically see the slide from the brief. Suspicious hostile. Do not escalate based on posture alone. The ROE wasn't written for nights like this. It was written to keep incidents off headlines. Negative hostile act, Liana said. Indicators only. Copy indicators only, the controller said, a bit of relief in his voice. Maintain overwatch. Maintain, watch, don't move. But down there, the RTB was closing, and the freighter was no longer pretending not to see. If the crew had already called ashore, and those two coastal contacts she'd marked said they had, then the boarding window was shrinking. She switched to the maritime net, keyed it twice to punch through the weather. Hail, Raven, be advised. Target is alerting. Deck lights on, speed increased. Recommend you assume early detection. Static, then hail. Raven, hail, that confirmed from higher? Negative. Indicators only. I'm telling you because your window just got smaller. A short silence, as if he was weighing how far to trust an Air Force pilot he'd met only over a radio. Copy, Raven. We'll go fast. That was all she needed. He'd adjust at his level without triggering a big red mission-compromised beacon up the chain. She kept orbiting, tightening her pattern to stay close without overflying the ship. Reeves's voice in the back of her head about not spooking anybody with low passes. From this angle, she could see the RTB's wake flaring as they hit the worst of the chop, bow hammering. The latter evolution was going to be nasty. Her radar scope pinged. Not the freighter. Not the RTB. The two coastal movers she'd tagged earlier had changed heading, no longer running parallel to shore but bending toward open water. Toward the freighter. Of course you did, she said under her breath. She snapped back to maritime. Hail, Raven. Two small craft are maneuvering off the coast toward your position. Range approximately, stand by. She checked her scale. Approximately 4 to 5 nautical miles from your ship, speed increasing. This time his reply was immediate. Raven, hail. That's your call, not mine. You pushing that to command? This was the decision point. If she told Ops now, small craft inbound, they would ask for weapons, ask for profile, ask for whether the boats were armed. She didn't have that yet. And with the weather clause hanging over the whole op, any whiff of unexpected contact could make higher say, too risky, bring the jet home. The Navy can fend for itself. But Hale, halfway across hard sea in a low boat, couldn't fend for himself. Not from a rush. Negative, I am not pushing to higher yet, Liana said, voice even. I don't have PID of hostile intent. I am advising you to expect company. A short, humorless chuckle came back. Copy, Raven. We like company. She almost smiled. Then the freighter did another thing it shouldn't have done. It turned. Not a full evasive turn, too slow for that, but a drift of the bow to make the lee side less generous, to complicate the boarding. Somebody aboard had done this before. Somebody aboard did not want visitors. That, combined with the inbound craft, made the picture clear. The operation was no longer low signature. It was lit, moving, and about to have guests. She cut back to Ops because she wasn't reckless enough to leave them blind. Ops, Raven 2-1. Be advised, I now have 2 small craft departing coastal area, heading toward target vessel. No visible weapons yet. Target vessel has altered heading, likely to disrupt boarding. This time the controller didn't hide the tension. Raven, Ops, do you assess hostile? Unable to assess hostile yet, Liana said, stressing it. But boarding team on approach will be in proximity when small craft arrive. Stand by. She could imagine the scramble behind that. Ops duty officer calling naval liaison calling someone in theater reaching for the weather card. A clean mission was turning messy, and messy missions got shut down. She didn't have time to wait for them to decide. She flipped back to Hale. Raven to boarding element, this is now time compressed. You have inbound small craft, 4 to 5 mics out. I will maintain eyes. I will not leave. Raven, Hale, that's all I needed. Down below, the RTB surged. On the freighter, figures clustered at the rail. And out on the black water, 2 dim, fast shapes kept coming. The night had just declared itself. The weather warning hit her headset like a cold slap. Raven 2-1, this is Spangdahlem Ops on secure. Freezing level is now reported at 7,000 and descending. Your current altitude is 7. Conditions on station are below approved minima. Execute RTB. Say again, execute RTB. Liana glanced at her outside air temp and at the thin rime building again along the canopy frame. They weren't wrong. The Baltic was squeezing upward, pushing the ice band right into her. Working altitude. She could climb and be clean. She could turn and be warm. She could also watch those 2 fast boats reach Hale's ladder with no one overhead. Below, the SEAL RTB was already alongside Vesper's hull, pitching in the swell. The boarding ladder was up, a pale line against black metal. Tiny figures moved, men with gear, hands busy, no weapons in hand because you needed both arms to climb. She keyed Hale first, because he was the one hanging off a ship. Hail, Raven. Higher is calling weather below minimums. I am ordered RTB. A gust buffeted the hog, made the HUD shimmy. She trimmed it out. Hale came back immediately, breath loud in the mic. He was working. Raven, Hale. If you leave now, we're exposed mid-climb. I know, she said. Ops was still waiting for her acknowledgement. She flipped back. Ops, Raven 2-1 copies RTB order due weather. There, on tape. She'd heard them, but she didn't turn. Instead, she tightened her orbit, keeping Vesper on her left side so she could roll in quickly if she had to. She dropped 20 more feet. Not enough to spike ice, just enough to keep the freighter clear in the murk. The 2 inbound small craft were brighter now on her display, their wakes longer, their intent no longer theoretical. Somebody ashore had told them exactly where to go. Raven Ops, the controller said, sharper. We do not show you turning. Negative, still establishing safe egress route, Liana said, tone professionally calm. Weather is patchy. I need a clean corridor. That was flimsy and she knew it. Ops probably knew it too. But unless they wanted to start yelling in front of everybody, they had to let her do pilot things for a minute. She went back to Hale. 2 fast movers now 5 clicks out, bearing direct to your position. No declared weapons, but they're not fishing. Understood, Hale said. We have 1 man on the ladder, 2nd preparing. We cannot break off without losing time. The image of a man halfway up, boots slipping on cold rungs, sling caught, while a hostile boat rammed his ride. She'd seen enough helmet cam to know how fast it went bad. Ops tried again. Raven 2-1, be advised. The RTB is non-discretionary. We have alternate divert fields available. You will exit the area. She let the silence sit a second. Her thumb hovered over the master arm switch the way it had in the opening moment over the sea. She could arm now and be ready. But ROE said no fire without hostile act. Right now all she had was intent. If I leave, that intent becomes action. If I stay, maybe I can stop it before it's technically hostile. Ops Raven, she said, I am monitoring ice, no accretion beyond manageable. I will depart once boarding element is off the ladder. That was the line. Not I refuse, just I will, after I stop people from dying. It gave Ops something to report. Up. Pilot is delaying for safety of joint force. Instead of pilot is freelancing. The controller's reply came back thinner, like he'd turned his head away from the mic to look at someone. Raven, higher acknowledges your concern for boarding element. You are to minimize time on station. Wilco. She exhaled slowly. That was as much grace as she'd get. Outside, Vesper's hull loomed and rolled. Spray kicked up in sheets. The RHIB bucked on its lines. She saw one seal, just a dark, overburdened shape, reach the ladder and start climbing. Another waited to follow, watching the water. Farther out, the two hostile boats changed formation. That more than anything else told her the night had tipped. Instead of running line abreast, they fanned. One slowing slightly, one taking a more easterly angle, splitting her field of fire before she even fired. She armed. Mayorop's element, Raven. 2 contacts maneuvering tactically toward you. I am armed. I will not fire unless they demonstrate hostile act or threaten your ladder. Hale sounded like he'd just gotten his chest over the rail himself. Raven, that's good copy. We're committed. Committed. No backing down with half your team aboard and half at sea. If someone rammed the RHIB now, men would go into water cold enough to take their strength in minutes. She checked fuel. Still good for a short fight and a divert. Ice still within limits. The hog's big straight wings didn't love this soup, but they weren't killing her yet. Ops didn't call again. Maybe Reeves was watching, jaw working, remembering the last time she'd chosen the safe option. Maybe he knew this was her trying to balance the scale. Below, the first hostile boat crossed an invisible line in her mind. Close enough now that, if it raised a weapon or lunged for the ladder, it would be a clear, reportable threat. She rolled slightly to keep it framed. Raven 2-1, she said mostly for the record, remaining on station to safeguard boarding element in proximity to hostile small craft. Then she throttled forward, lowering toward the fight she'd just chosen over her own clean record. The first boat committed. From her cockpit, the craft looked like a dark smear tearing a white wound across the water, straight toward Vesper's lee, engine maxed, bow high. No fishing lights, no lazy arc, just a purposeful run to where American operators were climbing a cold steel ladder. That was as close to hostile act as the night was going to give her. Marops, Raven, lead contact is closing on your ladder, Liana said, eyes flicking between HUD and the real sea. I am going to make a pass. Hale came back, whined in his mic, voice tight. Raven, clear to engage for disruption. We are danger close on the hull. That was all the moral cover she needed. Legally, it would be messier. Tactically, it was simple. She rolled the hog into a shallow bank to line up parallel to the freighter but offset, so her fire would rake the water ahead of the boat and not into the ship's side. The A-10's nose settled like a hunting animal. Water and ship and hostile craft slid into alignment. Ops, Raven 2-1. I am conducting a warning and disabling pass on inbound small craft threatening friendly forces. Short burst, waterline, away from superstructure. If they wanted to stop her, they'd have to say it now. They didn't. She flipped the master arm guard, thumb steady. The HUD symbology changed, gun pipper alive. She keyed the laser to range the surface ahead of the boat. She wanted no surprises about distance. Her world narrowed to the pipper, the closing boat, the memory of Reeves's voice telling her not to give the mishap board anything to chew on. Outside, the A-10's engines groaned as she pulled a little power to steady the platform. Raven, hail, we see him. He's 50 out. Cleared forward, she said. She squeezed. The GAU-87 barrels spun up with that unmistakable growl that lived in every KS pilot's bones. Even through the cockpit, she felt it in her chest, the hog shuddering as a tight, disciplined string of 30 millimeters tore out and scythed the water in front of the hostile boat. Night exploded into white spray and orange tracers. The sea leapt. It was not a long burst, half a second, maybe a touch more. But it was loud and undeniable. The effect was immediate. The boat's driver flinched, overcorrected, wake skidding. The bow fell as he chopped power. Whoever had told him to run out and scare a boarding party had not told him he'd be under the guns of a low American attack jet. Nice shot, someone half yelled over the maritime net. Not Hale, probably one of his men still in the RTB, adrenaline spiking. Liana eased the hog out of the pass, wings level, watching for any return fire. ROE said no lethal without hostile, but if they shot now, she'd have all the authority she needed. They didn't shoot. Instead, the lead boat slowed to a confused, bobbing crawl, crew throwing hands up, trying to decide if this was still worth it. That bought Hale seconds, gold seconds, for men on the ladder to clear. Raven, Marops, disruption effective, Hale said, and this time his voice held open approval. Keep them off us. She allowed herself one breath. Then the other two boats reacted the way trained people did when air showed up. They split to dilute her fire. One broke wider, to starboard of the freighter, where her line of fire would take her closer to the ship than she liked. The other tightened to the freighter's shadow, trying to use the hull as cover, banking on the idea that she wouldn't risk a pass that close. Smart, she thought. Annoying, but smart. Ops finally came back, strained. Raven 2-1, confirm you discharged the gun. Affirm. Short, controlled burst into water ahead of hostile small craft, threatening friendly boarding element. No hits on vessel, Liana said, voice crisp so the recording would show she was thinking. Effect achieved. There was the barest pause. Someone typing, someone time-stamping. Raven, copy. She could almost hear Reeves thinking, you said you'd stay in the lines. But the line had moved the second those boats turned in. Below, the first hostile boat was now out of the immediate fight, circling, cowed. But the two maneuvering ones were the real problem. Their separation meant she'd have to choose who to deter first, and every pass would cost fuel and time in icing air. She rolled back left, tracking the one trying to sneak up in the freighter's shadow. Mayrops, Raven. Two contacts remain maneuvering. They're adapting. I'll have to work them one at a time. Raven, Hale. We're still on the ladder. Keep them honest. Working it, she said. And as she set up for the second, more complicated run, it hit her. The night was no longer about whether she'd obeyed RTB. It was about whether she could stretch one hog, two Mavericks, and a finite gun load to control three determined boats in bad weather without putting a single round through American operators. That was a harder problem, and the boats had just made it harder by splitting. The moment she pulled out of the gun run, the hog felt heavier, not from weight, but from math. She glanced at her stores. Gun, healthy but not endless, and every strafe in this soup had to be more precise than the one before. 2 AGM-65s still hanging, sleek and expensive, meant for armor or harder targets than fiberglass hulls. Weather still sinking. Fuel fine now, less fine if she had to make 3 more passes. Below, the disrupted lid boat rocked in the wake, cowed. The second and third, though, showed they'd learned. The one on the freighter's shadow darted in and out, daring her to fire close to American steel. The other, the one she didn't like, had swung wider, presenting more angle, and for a brief second, her sensor picked up a shape that didn't look like a rope or fender. "Is that a gun?" she muttered. She zoomed, using what contrast the dark sea would give her. The boat's bow dipped, then rose. A figure braced. It wasn't perfect PID, but combined with its closing speed and the timing, right as Hale had men mid-ladder, it was the highest threat contact in the water. "Marops, Raven," she called. "One boat shows possible weapon. That's my priority." Hale sounded winded. "Raven, we have 2 on deck, 1 on ladder, RHIB still alongside. We can't maneuver. You take what you need." That was as clean an authorization as she was going to get from the people actually bleeding saltwater. Ops was silent. Maybe they were stunned she'd fired the gun. Maybe they were chasing higher for guidance about missiles on small boats in the Baltic. She didn't have time to wait. She rolled right, putting the aggressive boat on the inner side of her turn, and brought up the Maverick page. The AGM-65 Seeker gimbaled, looking for something to love on a cold, reflective ocean. This was exactly why no one liked doing this over water. Low contrast, moving targets, false locks on wavetops. She narrowed her field, cued the Seeker close to the boat's track, and let it hunt. "Come on," she whispered. The crosshairs wobbled, then steadied on the dark canoe shape slicing toward the freighter. The boat was big enough, metal enough, fast enough to give the Maverick a real return. "Ops, Raven 2-1. I am employing 1 AGM-65 against a small craft displaying hostile indicators, closing on friendly boarding element. This is to prevent hostile act at close quarters." She said it like reading from a manual, so later when they played it back, every word would be there. No one told her no. She took a breath, let it out, and thumbed the pickle. The missile dropped, engine flaring and streaked away, a brief, bright line against the black. She kept the nose steady, watching. The Maverick arced low, smart, homing on the boat that hadn't believed air would do this over a freight ship. Impact on water targets wasn't cinematic. It was violent and messy. The missile hit just off the boat's centerline, detonating in a blossom of white spray and orange, breaking hull and momentum. The boat slewed, stopped being a threat, became debris. "Holy!" someone on Hale's net started, then cut himself off. Hale came in instead, tight but grateful. "Raven, good effect. That one's out." "Copy," she said, already scanning for the last. Because of course the last boat had seen it. And if the pilot on that boat had been wavering, the sight of an American jet casually deleting his buddy from the surface snapped him into a single, furious plan. He gunned it. Instead of playing the hull's shadow game, he came straight, bow punching through the chop, aiming not for the freighter itself, but for the gap where the RHIB and ladder were working. If he couldn't scare them off, he'd ram the whole evolution and call it done. "There you are," Liana said. This one she couldn't missile. She'd just burned one, and slinging a second at a target this close to the mothership was inviting a fuel-air headline. This one was going to be gun up close with almost no room for mistake. Mayrops Raven. Remaining boat is committing directly to your ladder. This will be danger close. Hale didn't even hesitate. Raven, take it. She rolled in, lower than she liked, feeling the hog get slapped by sea-level wind. The freighter's bulk filled part of her right side view. The RTB and ladder were painfully close. She set the pipper ahead of the boat. Not on it. She would walk the rounds in, just like the first time, but with half the lateral margin. Ops, Raven. Engaging last contact danger close to friendly forces. She didn't wait for permission. There was no time. As she pulled the trigger, she knew two things at once. The inquiry would hate the Maverick on a small boat in the Baltic, and every man on that ladder would remember the sound of her gun as the reason they didn't get knocked into winter water. The rounds went out, ripping a line across the sea, and the last boat's bow started to fall. The last boat didn't die cleanly. Her burst tore the water and punched the bow, but instead of rolling over and quitting, the craft slewed sideways in the chop and kept drifting toward the RTB on ugly momentum. One man aboard flailed, another tried to grab something. Line, gun, it didn't matter. At that distance, even a panicked shot could travel high enough to hit a man halfway up the ladder. Raven, Hale, ladder occupied, we are exposed, he barked, voice raw. I see him, Liana said. She saw everything, too much and not enough. The dark curve of Vesper's hull, wet and close, the RTB banging against it. One operator frozen mid-rung, unable to move while the boat below rocked, and the crippled hostile boat still sliding on its own wake toward the contact point. If that boat's nose hit the RTB just right, the ladder would swing and the man would be tossed. She didn't have time for a wide setup. A textbook run would have put her farther out. Longer final, perfect pipper settle. The Baltic didn't care about textbook. Mayrops, Raven, danger close, starboard to port run, fire parallel to hull. Keep your heads in. Copy, Raven, heads in, Hale shouted to someone off mic. She rolled the hog to put the freighter on her right, angling so her line of fire would track just off the ship's skin and into the water between the RTB and the crippled boat. That meant flying lower than she liked beside a big metal wall that could throw back spray and turbulence. The A-10 shivered but held. Ops, Raven, firing to protect friendly forces in immediate contact. No rounds into superstructure. She didn't wait for the scolding. She dropped the nose, brought the pipper just ahead of the sliding boat, and squeezed a shorter, even more disciplined burst than before. The GAU-8 roared, the sea erupted in a sideways sheet, and the line of rounds walked exactly where she'd aimed, between the RTB and the threat, chewing up the water and throwing a wall of spray and concussion at the hostile boat. That did it. The crippled craft lost what little steerage it had, turned away from the ladder in pure survival, and began to wallow. One of the men aboard threw his hands up and lay flat, as if that could protect him from 30 millimeters. They were done. Good effect! Good effect! Hale shouted, and there was real relief in it. Ladder secure. Last man coming up. Liana pulled up, easing away from the hull, watching for ricochet, for any secondary threat. Nothing. The RTB stayed pressed to the freighter, but not in panic, just riding the swell. On the deck above, she caught a glimpse of a figure in dark gear being yanked up and over, boots clearing the edge. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Mayrops, Raven, Current surface contacts disrupted or disabled. You are clear to complete boarding. Raven, Hale said, calmer now. You just saved us a swim. We owe you. That hit her harder than she expected. Not the words, but the certainty in them. SEALs didn't pass out credit for nothing. They'd heard her RTB call earlier. They knew she could have been halfway home by now. Roger, she said, keeping it dry. Finish your work. The sea kept heaving. The freighter, as if sulking, settled into a steady course. The remains of the Maverick-struck boat drifted, no longer part of the fight. The first boat she'd warned off hovered well outside the danger ring now, engine low, very interested in not being the next example. She took stock. Gun, lower, but enough for a deterrent burst. One Maverick still hanging. Fuel, fine for a divert. Ice, holding. The hog had done what it was built to do. Stay low, stay mean, stay with the guys who couldn't dodge. Then the net changed. Raven 2-1, ops. The voice was flat. No congratulations, no awe. We show multiple weapons discharges from your aircraft. Confirm all fired in accordance with ROE. Here it was, the other half of the night. Ops, Raven, she said, gaze still on the water in case any surprise skiff decided to join late. All fires were to prevent imminent threat to U.S. boarding element. No rounds on target vessel. 1 AGM expended on armed small craft. All effects away from superstructure. Silence. Longer than before. She imagined the controller passing that up to someone with rank, and that someone replaying her earlier, slower than they liked RTB acknowledgement. Hale came back on the maritime net, almost as if to cut through whatever stiffness was forming on the other side. Raven, we're securing the deck now. Your cover made the difference. Copy, she said, softer. I'm still overhead. She stayed in her orbit, not as tight now, letting the adrenaline bleed off. The Baltic's gray ceiling sat heavily above her. Below, on cold steel, men she didn't know were alive because she'd chosen to stay in lousy weather and fire within meters of them. Ops didn't speak again right away, and that silence, the measured, administrative kind, told her the fight on the water was over. The next one under fluorescent lights was just getting ready to start. The sea slipped behind her as a dark, indifferent sheet, the way it always did, like it had never held men on ladders or boats closing to kill them. Liana eased the hog out of the tight Overwatch orbit and pointed her nose southwest, climbing carefully through the same wet air that had tried to push her off station. Marops, Raven is departing station, she said, giving Hale the courtesy before anyone else. You are clear of small craft threat. Raven, Hale replied, breathing easier now. We've got it from here. We'll make sure they hear your part. She didn't say they already did. She just clicked twice and switched back to the Air Force net. Raven 2-1 ops, the controller said, back to that professional distance. Confirm you are RTB. Ops Raven, affirm departing station. Current altitude 7,000, climbing to weather. I am reporting light to moderate icing. That last part mattered. If she didn't put it on the record, the weather clause would sound like something she made up to buy time. If she did, it would be clear she'd stayed in spite of it. She pushed the climb. The A-10 trembled as it nosed into thicker cloud. Ice traced along the leading edges again, thin at first, then building. She kicked on anti-ice, watched the gauges, watched the rate. Still within what the aircraft could shed, but this was no night to loiter. Ops came back. Raven, for your awareness, primary field is reporting continued deterioration. Divert is available at Wask, Poland. Fuel state? She checked. The earlier, lower work over the ship hadn't been free. Ops Raven, Fuel state sufficient for divert. Recommend I take WASC. Approved. Proceed WASC. Contact approach on handoff. There was relief in that. Flying all the way back to Germany in this soup, with ice and the weight of what she'd just done, was an invitation for the night to punish her. Poland was closer. Poland was smarter. She banked gently, letting the hog's nose swing eastward. Below the clouds, the Baltic weather sulked, but land would mean better radar coverage, more eyes, a runway she didn't have to fight for. For the first time since the RTB order, there was no one on the maritime net, no men yelling over spray, no boats forcing her to do math. The cockpit got big and quiet. The GAU-8 was silent now, just a weight in the nose. The spent pylon where the Maverick had been was a reminder in metal. You fired that at a boat. The de-ice hissed softly. That was when the other voice arrived. Reeves's, patched in, controlled. Raven 2-1, this is Strike. We have your reporting. On landing, you will proceed directly to debrief facilities at Divert. Do you copy? So he'd stayed to listen. Strike, Raven. Copy direct to debrief on landing. A pause. Not long, but personal. You bring the jet home in one piece, Reeves said. We'll talk about the rest. That was as much grace as she was going to get over a radio everyone could hear. She checked her instruments again. Icing was steady but not spiking. The hog's big wings and straight lines helped. Made to live low and slow over ugly air. But even the hog had limits, and she'd brushed them tonight. The Polish controllers picked her up and cleared her down through layered gray toward the runway. As she descended, the ice began to slough off, rime turning to wet streaks on the canopy. Lights appeared out of the murk. Civilization, order, a place where people weren't trying to knock Americans into freezing water. WASC approach. Raven 2-1 on vectors. Single ship A-10, recovering with expended ordnance. Raven 2-1 WASC, runway 29, winds. The controller rattled off in accented English, calm, as if she were just another winter diversion. She set up, flaps, gear, checked her speeds. The landing itself was almost insultingly ordinary compared to the last hour. Flare, mains down, nose wheel, speed brakes. The hog planted on cold Polish concrete, tires hissing. As she rolled out, the adrenaline finished draining. What was left was a hollow awareness. The shooting part had been easy. The explaining part would not be. Ground directed her to a hard stand. Engines whined down, blades spooling to silence. The canopy popped, and winter air knifed in, carrying the smell of jet exhaust and wet tarmac. A security team and an ops-looking major were already walking toward her, collars up against the cold. No shouting, no cuffs. This wasn't that kind of night. But it was the kind of night where people wanted the story fast, while gun cam and radio logs were still warm. Liana pulled off her helmet, hair damp against her temples, and climbed down the ladder. Her legs felt the aftershocks, firing low beside a ship, staying in ice, choosing to pickle a Maverick on a boat. Choices that had felt clear with men on a ladder now had harsh, fluorescent edges. Captain Tran? The major said. Yes, sir. Ops wants you in debrief immediately. Bring your kneeboard. She nodded. Jet's good. 1 AGM expended. Gun expended per logs, minor icing. We saw. He didn't say we all saw. He didn't have to. She looked once back at the A-10, gray, squat, still ticking with cooling metal. It had done its job. She'd done hers. Now she had to make everyone else believe it. The Polish debrief room was too bright for the kind of night she'd just flown. White walls, white light, a portable projector already humming on a folding table. Someone had laid out a carafe of coffee and not bothered with cups. A young intel tech in an unfamiliar patch was setting up a laptop, fingers fast, trying not to stare at her flight suit. Liana dropped her helmet bag beside the chair and stayed standing. She was still in her G-suit, zipper halfway down, hair pulled back in a quick tie. Her cheeks were wind-chilled, her eyes tired but alert. The screen flickered, then showed a still image that was unmistakable. The Baltic under NVG green, a freighter's hull, and a small boat in the kill zone of a 30mm burst. A voice came over the speaker, Reeves, patched in from Germany. "Captain Tran." "Sir?" "I see you got to Poland in one piece." "Yes, sir. Aircraft is safe. Minor icing, all reported." "Good," he said. The warmth ended there. "We're going to walk through it. You're being recorded. Intel, go ahead." The Intel tech, Staff Sergeant something, she caught the name but let it go. Clicked. The video rolled. From the hog's nose cam, the night replayed itself. First the freighter, lights snapping on, then the RTB, then, unmistakably, the two small craft turning out from the coast. "Timestamp 1934-17Z, the tech said. "Vessel alters lighting. You report indicators only." "That's correct," Liana said. "ROE at that time?" Reeves asked. "Overwatch only. Engage small craft only with PID of hostile intent. Remain outside vessel silhouette. RTB if weather falls below minimum." "So when you saw indicators, you did not elevate to higher?" "I notified the boarding officer directly," Liana said. "Lieutenant Commander Hale. Because if I'd pushed to higher right then, they might have scrubbed while the RTB was already committed." "That's exactly why we scrub," Reeves said, irritation cracking through. "To avoid a hot boarding." "With respect, sir, the boarding was already hot. The ship had lit up and accelerated. They were going anyway." Silence. Then the tech moved them forward. 1938-2Z, small craft turning inbound. 1938-15Z, Spangdahlem Ops issues RTB due to freezing level. On the screen, her HUD altimeters descended, and the clouds filled the top half of the picture. Over comms, her own voice came through. "Ops, Raven 2-1, copies RTB order due weather." Reeves pounced. "You acknowledged." "I did. But you did not turn," Reeves said. "I did not," she agreed. "Because at 1938, sir, the SEALs were within a couple minutes of ladder, and the boats were within 5 of them. If I'd turned then, I would have been on the backside of a cloud deck listening to them call boat, 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 with no one to answer." The projector showed the first pass. The dipping boat, the warning burst tearing the water. Even in the sterile room, the GAU-8 sound made the table vibrate. 1941-03Z, the tech said. "Gun fired. Reported as warning and disabling pass." Reeves's voice lost volume, but not edge. "You understand how that looks, Tran? Baltic, political water, small craft, and you're hosing 30mm in there, after RTB." "Yes, sir," she said, meeting the camera's cold eye. "I also understand that the boat stopped. That was the effect we needed." The tech clicked again. The Maverick launch lit the room faintly green. The missile's line, the hit, the boat breaking apart. 1942-27Z, the tech said. "AGM-65 expended on small craft?" Even the Polish officer in the corner shifted at that. Reeves let out a long breath. "Talk me through that one." She could have said poor contrast forced me to use what I had. She could have said the gun was misfeeding. Gun hiccups over water and cold weren't unheard of. But that would start a stack of maintenance checks and lies, and none of it would match the way she'd flown. So she told the truth. That boat showed weapon posture and was closing on a joint boarding element that could not maneuver. I had a valid seeker lock. I chose the cleanest, fastest option to remove it from the fight. "You chose the loudest option," Reeves said. "It was the safest for them," Liana said. Not for me. Not for this room. For them. The tech froze on a frame. The A-10 scudding past the freighter's hull, guns spitting dangerously close. 1943 11 Zed, second gun employment. Danger close, declared by Raven. Reeves was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the anger was banked by something else. Professional respect, maybe, or resignation. You flew that one tight. I had to. The ladder was occupied. He exhaled. Intel, capture that. Ladder occupied. That's the justification line. The tech nodded, typing. Then Reeves said the part she'd known was coming. This will go higher. The theater's going to want a formal look. Whether RTB ignored, ordnance expended on small craft, proximity to a flagged vessel. You'll get to tell this again in front of people without flight suits. Understood, sir. You're going to get paperwork. She nodded once. Roger. A pause, lighter, human. Hale already sent over a preliminary voice via Navy circuit. He says you saved his team. Liana blinked, surprised. He sent it that fast? He did, which is why we're having this conversation and not something uglier, Reeves said. I don't like that you stayed. I really don't like that you stayed in ice, but I can't ignore that there were Americans on a ladder and 3 boats inbound. He let that hang. Then, you did the right thing for them. Maybe not the right thing for the AFTTP. Liana straightened. If I have to pick, sir, I'll pick them again. I know, Reeves said, and this time it almost sounded like approval wrapped in exhaustion. That's what worries me. The tech shut off the video. The room got whiter. Sit tight at WASC, Reeves said. Don't go anywhere. You'll be contacted by the inquiry cell. Copy. The line clicked dead. Liana finally sat. The chair was cold through her suit. On the blank wall where the Baltic had been, she could still see boats, spray, a ladder. The shooting was over, but the night wasn't finished with her yet. They put her in a smaller room this time. Less projection, more phone. WASC had found a side office with a tan couch and a desk that had seen better wars. The radiator clanked. Outside the window, the A-10 sat under a faint winter sun, de-icers working its wings. Liana sat at the desk with her notebook open, pen ready, even though she knew most of what mattered would be decided in voices, not ink. A petty officer from the Navy side, blue coveralls, polite but tight, poked his head in. Ma'am, we have Lieutenant CMDR Hale on VTC. Your colonel's patched in, plus a JOC rep. They want you on to hear his statement. Copy, Liana said, standing and smoothing her flight suit. She still smelled faintly of jet and cold air. Not a bad smell for a pilot about to get judged. The screen on the wall blinked, then resolved into a grainy image of a cramped compartment. Shipboard, by the look of it. Hale was there in a dark shirt, hair damp, a bandage visible on someone moving behind him. His face lit up a fraction when he saw her on the other end. Raven, he said. Good to see you vertical. Likewise, Commander, she said. A second window popped up. Reeves from Germany, jaw set, headset on. A third window showed a staff major with the Joint Operations Center badge on the wall behind him, expression neutral in that way only staff could manage. The major started. This will serve as a preliminary joint account of last night's maritime interdiction. We have Air Force pilot Captander Tran, USAF. We have boarding OIC Lieutenant CMDR Hale, USN. We're focusing on the decision to remain on station and the employment of ordnance in proximity to the target vessel. Lieutenant CMDR Hale, you may begin. Hale didn't check notes. He didn't even look down. At approximately 1939 Zid, my team was in the approach phase to the target vessel. We were committed, RHIB alongside, ladder evolution starting. At that time, Captain Tran reported 2 inbound small craft from the coast. That was accurate. The JOC Major typed. Were you aware Hire had issued an RTB to the aircraft due to weather? I was aware she said she was ordered RTB, Hale said. I was also aware we were on a ladder in the dark in winter seas and 2 unknown boats were 5 mics out. Her staying was tactically correct. The Major glanced, probably, at Reeves's window. Lieutenant CMDR, to be clear, are you saying the Air Force platform's presence was essential? I'm saying the Air Force platform's continued presence prevented those boats from interfering with my boarding, Hale said, voice tightening. Her first gunburst stopped the lead boat without putting rounds on my ship. Her missile removed the most dangerous contact. Her final pass kept a crippled boat from slamming our RHIB. We were danger close. She flew like she knew it. Liana kept her face neutral, but something at the back of her neck uncoiled. The Major wasn't done. We have concerns about the AGM-65 employment. That's a high-visibility munition in that water space. Hale blinked once, slowly, as if mildly offended. Sir, I had a man halfway up a ladder. I don't care if she threw a piano at that boat. It was closing, it was postured, and I could not maneuver. She took the cleanest option. Reeves cut in, measured. Commander, you understand we have weather-based RTBs for a reason, aircrew survival. Yes, sir, Hale said. And you should. And last night your pilot made a call that said, I can manage this ice and protect friendlies. She wasn't joyriding. She was answering my threat. That landed. Even the JOC Major's shoulders dipped a little. The Major tried a different angle. Would your team have taken casualties without her? Hale didn't hesitate. At minimum, 1 man in the water, possibly struck, possibly hypothermic. Worst case, a boarding attempt delayed or failed. We planned for resistance, but we were at the vulnerable point in the ladder cycle. Her fires made it survivable. He looked straight at Liana then, through lag and pixels. We were not mostly fine. We were at risk. She removed the risk. Reeves exhaled audibly in his window, somewhere between relief and resignation. That's useful context, Commander, thank you. The Major typed more, then said, in that case, the joint concern narrows to the RTB non-compliance and munition selection. That will be administrative, not operational. There it was. Administrative. Not a career guillotine, not a criminal thing. Paper, counseling, maybe a reprimand. The kind of wound you could fly with. Thank you, sir, Liana said, finally speaking. I accept review of that. Hale's mouth quirked. If they ask me again, I'll tell them the same thing, he said. You stayed. That's what mattered. The call ended in a flurry of polite Rogers and we'll be in touch. The screen went black. The room felt bigger again. Liana let out a breath. The petty officer outside pretended not to have been listening. Her phone buzzed. Message from Reeves. You got backed by the guys you saved. That's rare. Don't waste it. We'll talk punishment when you're back. She looked out the window at the Hog, at the gray Polish sky. The fight over the Baltic had made sense. This part, balancing obedience and necessity, was messier. But at least now, she wasn't standing in it alone. They didn't put her in flight line rooms for this one. This was a borrowed conference space on base, blinds half drawn, the kind of place people used for financial audits and EO briefs. Today, it was for her judgment. Across from Liana sat a lieutenant colonel she didn't know. Air Force, inspector's badge on his tablet, name tag reading Kurtz. Next to him, a civilian analyst from the theater staff. Hair in a tight bun, eyes as neutral as glass. On the table were printouts of her last 12-month sorties, weather notes, and, to her surprise, a one-page summary of a loss report from Afghanistan years back. They'd done their homework. Captain Tran, Lieutenant Colonel Kurtz began, voice not hostile, just dry. We've reviewed your initial debrief and the joint statement from Lieutenant Siamdar Hale. Operationally, your actions preserved friendly lives. That part is clear. He tapped the paper. What we're clarifying now is whether this is part of a pattern of prioritizing presence over safety directives. Presence over safety. Pretty words for you, stay when we say go. Sir, I stayed because the boarding element was at the most vulnerable point, and I had the capacity to mitigate the threat, Liana said. Hands on the table, fingers laced, posture straight. The civilian spoke for the first time. In January, you aborted a winter TS sortie over Bavaria for icing. That abort was correct. No one disputes that. But afterward, your squadron commander noted you appeared frustrated by it. I was, Liana said, because the ground unit lost the overhead they wanted. Because they lost you, the civilian corrected mildly. Not because they were in immediate contact. That night, yes. Kurt slid another sheet forward. And 2 years ago in Afghanistan, your squadron lost Captain Serrano on a night when KAS was delayed getting on station. There it was, laid naked on the table. Yes, sir, Liana said, throat tight for a second. We were late and the JTAC was taking fire. Serrano got hit on egress. Did that event influence your decision to stay over the Baltic? Kurtz asked. He said it like it was a checkbox, but she knew this was the fulcrum. Say no, and she sounded robotic, unbelievable. Say yes, and she sounded ruled by ghosts. It informed my understanding of what happens when you're not there, she said slowly. I know what we didn't have air when we needed it looks like. Last night I had the ability to be there. The civilian tilted her head. Even after weather minima were breached. I was monitoring icing. I was within aircraft limits, Liana said. If accumulation had exceeded limits, I would have left, but it hadn't yet. I weighed that against a boarding ladder in winter water with 3 boats inbound. Kurtz tapped his tablet, reading. You also selected an AGM-65 for a small surface contact. Was that emotionally influenced? No, sir, she said, firmer now. That was a tactical selection. Gun requires geometry I didn't have, and more time over the hull than I liked. Missile was positive lock, fastest effect, least exposure for the boarding party. It's messier to explain, but it was cleaner to execute. He watched her for a beat, gauging whether she believed it. She did. What I'm hearing, the civilian said, is that you carry an aversion to being absent when friendlies are exposed. I carry an aversion to being late, Liana corrected, surprising herself with the heat in it. There's a difference. Yesterday I wasn't late. I was overhead with weapons, and they were in extremis. I didn't stay because I wanted to rewrite a weather abort from January. I stayed because people were on a ladder. Kurtz's expression softened by a millimeter. Your commander, Lieutenant Colin Reeves, says you're a disciplined pilot who occasionally leans forward. His concern is that leaning forward will one day overtake the directive. He's not wrong to watch me, Liana said. But he also knows I don't stay just to stay. I stay when the tactical picture shifts. Yesterday it shifted. The civilian jotted that down word for word. Kurtz closed the folder. Here's where we are. Tactically sound, administratively non-compliant, Motivations, mixed, professional judgment plus personal history. That doesn't equal recklessness, but it does equal monitor. So? Liana asked. So I will recommend to your commander a formal letter of counseling or reprimand, not suspension of flight status, Kurtz said. Final approval is his and above his. They may want to talk to you again. Theater doesn't love missiles on boats. I understand. Kurtz looked at her, not unkind. What you did out there is why we put people in airplanes. We just also need those people to come back when we tell them to. Liana nodded, throat easing. Yes, sir. When she stepped back into the corridor, it was quieter, less clinical. The Baltic felt far away. No spray, no green glow. No boats cutting toward her people. But the feeling was the same. Stay, take the hit, protect the ones in the water. Recommendation pending or not, she knew which choice she'd make again. They brought her in on a VTC with more flags on the wall than flight jackets in the room. This time it wasn't Reeves or the inquiry colonel. It was a theater-level ops brigadier, USAF, sitting at a long table somewhere farther east, with a naval captain on his right and a state defense liaison tile blinking in and out at the bottom of the screen. Baltic ops were never just military. Someone was always counting how it would look from Kaliningrad or on some late-night talk show in a capital she'd never see. Captain Tran, the brigadier said, voice calm, practiced. We've reviewed your tapes. We wanted to talk through the engagement in the context of the operating area. Yes, sir, Liana said. She sat straight in the little Polish conference room, notebook open, pen ready, even though she doubted they wanted her notes. The naval captain leaned forward. You realize you were within a monitored maritime corridor that both Russia and several Baltic states track pretty aggressively? Yes, ma'am. And you realize the vessel you were covering, while lawfully boarded under our authorities, was still being watched. So when an American aircraft fires, anything that becomes a data point. Yes, ma'am, Liana said again. The brigadier flicked his hand, bringing up a shared slide, colored rings around a stylized Baltic. We have what we call sensitivity bands, Captain. You were operating right up against one. Inside, we strongly prefer non-kinetic or maritime solutions, especially around commercial hulls. You chose to fire 3 times and release 1 AGM. He didn't say it like an accusation, more like a surgeon saying you used a scalpel there. Interesting. Yes, sir. Each was to prevent imminent threat to friendly forces, she said. I kept all fires off the superstructure. I fired into water. The AGM was on a contact away from the vessel. And that, the brigadier said, is why this conversation is about nuance and not about what the hell were you doing out there. The state defense tile finally stabilized, an older woman with glasses, headset on. From where I sit, Captain, the problem isn't that you protected your people. It's that we have to be absolutely certain you didn't hit what we sometimes call the wrong camera. Liana blinked. Ma'am, there are a lot of eyes on that sea, the woman said. If one of them had captured an A-10 strafing right alongside a commercial hull, that's a 90-second clip that turns into 3 days of us saying, no, actually, she was protecting a boarding party. The fact you kept your rounds parallel to the hull and didn't ventilate it, that helps me. That was unexpected. She'd spent the last 12 hours waiting for someone to hammer her for pulling the trigger at all. Hearing that her angle was what saved her made something in her ease. The naval captain nodded. Also, you didn't chase the first boat once it broke off. No, ma'am. Once it stopped threatening, I left it. That's de-escalatory behavior. the captain said. "We can show that." The brigadier steepled his fingers. "Our biggest concern, Captain, was that you would look like you were making a point. We said RTB, she stayed, then she shot up the neighborhood. That is not what your tapes show. What your tapes show is, you stayed, you fired narrowly, you stopped firing when the threat stopped." "Yes, sir," Liana said. "That was intentional." "I believe you." He glanced off screen, then back. "Your commander will handle the administrative side, because we do need pilots to respect weather RTBs, but from theater's perspective, we're not pushing for anything more punitive." Relief washed through her, not as a rush, but as a slow, warming spread. She hadn't realized how tight her shoulders had been. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," he said, but his tone was lighter. "You used an AGM-65 on a speedboat. I will be answering questions about that for at least the next 48 hours. Liana allowed herself a small, rueful breath. "Understood." The state liaison cut in again. "One more point, Captain. The reason we have those sensitivity bands is because someone, somewhere, always thinks we're trying to escalate. Your behavior last night gives us a good story. We minimized effects. We protected a joint boarding. We left when it was over. Keep doing that, and the operators will keep getting to board ships." "Yes, ma'am." The brigadier rapped it. "Bottom line, your precision saved you. If that gun tape had shown rounds striking the hull, we'd be having a very different talk. Let that inform you next time." "Yes, sir." The screen blinked out. The room shrank back to normal size. Liana sat for a moment, pen still in her hand. She thought back to the angle she'd flown beside the freighter, how she'd felt the wall of steel in her peripheral vision and adjusted to keep every round just off it. At the time, it had been pilot pride and protection of the men on the ladder. Turned out it had protected her too. Administrative, not career-ending. Reeves would have something for her to sign. She could live with that. And quietly, she was pleased. Because for all the talk of escalation and bans and cameras, none of them had said the one thing that would have cut deepest. You shouldn't have stayed. They hadn't said it. So she could keep being the pilot who did. Reeves didn't make her wait days. They flew her back to Spangdahlem the next afternoon, weather marginal but legal. This time she was just a passenger in a transport. No weapons to manage, no boats to chase. The base looked the same. Wet ramp, low gray sky, airmen in reflective vests. It was only when she stepped into the squadron building that she felt the shift. Conversations dipped. Eyes slid her way. Not hostile, just curious. Everyone had heard some version. "Boss wants you," the exec said, jerking a thumb toward Reeves's office. Reeves was standing by the window when she entered, sleeves rolled again, as if he'd been in the middle of something else and paused. On his desk was a single manila folder. No stack, no pile, just one. "Tran," he said. "Sir." "Sit." She did. The chair was the same uncomfortable one she'd sat in after the January weather. Abort. This time she didn't feel small. Reeves tapped the folder. "I spoke with theater, with the inquiry officer, and with the Navy. You'll be happy to know the SEAL OIC would probably name his next dog after you." A corner of her mouth twitched. "That's reassuring." He let himself smile for half a second, then sobered. "Here's where we landed. You ignored a non-discretionary RTB. You expended ordnance multiple times in a sensitivity band. You used a Maverick on a small craft. All of that is reportable, and all of that requires some kind of corrective action." "Yes, sir." At the same time, Reeves went on, you did exactly what we tell Kias and Overwatch pilots to do when friendlies are about to get hurt. You stayed. You were precise. You didn't go cowboy. You minimized collateral. You clearly articulated why, on the net, in the moment. And the people you protected are shouting from the rooftops that you were decisive. He opened the folder, slid a paper toward her. The top line was familiar. Letter of reprimand, counseling. The official, tidy way to say you colored outside. This is what I can live with, Reeves said. Not Article 15, not grounding. This goes in your file. It will probably slow your next board. But you keep flying. There it was. Consequences, not ruin. She read it quickly. It was fairer than she'd expected. It spelled out the RTB refusal and the ordnance choices. But it also cited, in support of joint force under imminent threat, and fires executed with due regard. Whoever drafted it had listened to the tapes. I can contest, she said, because that was part of the script. You can, Reeves said. But if you do, we reopen the can. Theater, Navy, state, everybody gets another bite. Meanwhile, you don't get to just go back to flying. You stay the pilot under review. She let that picture form, grounded in paperwork limbo, watched, questioned. Or one sheet in a folder, a raised eyebrow at a future promotion, but wheels up again. I'll accept it, she said. Reeves nodded, as if that was the answer he'd hoped she was adult enough to give. Sign. She signed, her name in ink under a night over the Baltic. When she handed it back, he didn't launch into a lecture. He just looked at her for a moment. I don't want you to stop being the pilot who cares if people on ladders live, he said. I do want you to loop me earlier if you think you're going to take a hit for them. Yes, sir. You flew well, he said, voice lower. Better than some people who never have to make that call. I don't want to lose you over paperwork. I don't want to make you write paperwork, she said, honest. He huffed. Too late. He dismissed her with a nod. Out in the squadron hall, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, U.S. Navy code. She answered. Tran. Captain Tran, this is Lieutenant CMDR Hale, came the familiar voice, clearer now, not full of spray. We're in Germany for a few hours before we hop back to our boat. Thought you might want to see the idiots you saved. A warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with reprimands. Yeah, she said. Yeah, I think I do. Good. Come to the visitor lot by the terminal. We've got something to show you. She ended the call, grabbed her jacket, and headed back out into the cold German afternoon. Paperwork in her file, but a team alive because she'd stayed. The SEALs looked bigger out of the water. They'd commandeered a corner of the base's transient terminal, a couple of flight cases, wet gear and green bags, coffee cups, a faint smell of neoprene and CLP. Lieutenant CMDR Hale was there, beard still damp from a rushed shower, wearing a hoodie over serviceable pants instead of black gear. Two of his men lounged in the molded plastic chairs like they owned the place. A third sat with his legs stretched out, ankle bandaged, boot off. He gave her a nod that was half thanks. Half this thing still hurts. Raven, Hale said, standing to meet her. Or do I call you Captain Tran when you're not saving us from boats? Liana's fine, she said, shaking his hand. You look better out of the spray. You sound better not arguing with your ops, he shot back, grinning. The men chuckled. The injured one, tall, blonde, eyes bright despite the bandage, pointed at her. That was you with the brrrr T right off the hull? That was me, she said. He whistled low. That was stupid close. Yeah, another added, dark-haired, arms crossed. I was halfway up that ladder thinking, if she's off even a little, I'm a story on a safety slide. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Liana said, but the tone was light. Hey, we're here, Blonde said, gesturing around. So you were perfect. Hale jerked his chin toward a ruggedized tablet on the table.